right, it looks like our backlog has all entered, so I'm sure we'll have a few people joining us in the next few minutes as well, but we will get started, so welcome. Like I mentioned earlier, if you were on the call earlier, this is the Before You Build Using AI to Navigate the Problem Space webinar. My name is Dr. Kathryn Brohman, so I'm the inaugural director of the Master of Digital Product Management program, which is one of our programs here at the Smith School of Business that focuses on innovation. We also invited people that were interested or looking at our Masters of Management and Innovation Entrepreneurship program, as well as our Masters in Management and Artificial Intelligence. All those programs really do start at the very same place, which is early stage innovation around the problem we're trying to solve. And this webinar was designed to inform how AI is really transforming how we navigate that space. So before we get into the webinar at Queen's, we always do acknowledge the fact that we are situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territories. We're grateful to live, learn, and play on these lands. So a couple quick reference points. We do this at the end of the webinar as well, but we don't in this content webinar really speak to any of our programs in detail. So we wanted to give you some information about upcoming webinars that focus more on the program themselves. And so Monday, November 17th is the MDPM webinar that from 12 to 1 that talks about the Masters of Digital Product Management program. And then we have Tuesday, December 16th is the next MMIE, which is our Innovation and Entrepreneurship webinar. You can also get more information about our program webinars on different websites. So if you're interested in the Masters of Management and Artificial Intelligence, you can get that detail as that one as well on the website. All right, so I am one of your faculty hosts today. We are fortunate enough to have two additional ones. And so Christian and Jake, if you want to come open up your cameras and give a wave. So I'm a faculty in digital technology here at the business school. My counterpart, Dr. Jake Brower, is an associate professor in the Smith School of Business on the marketing side. He is also a two-time winner of the MDPM Faculty Award. So he is a very loved faculty member within the Masters of Digital Product Management program, as well as other programs here at Smith. But at the business school, really, we focus on both technology and marketing because digital product management is really sits at the intersection of those two disciplines. And Dr. Christian Muise is actually our incoming new academic co-director of the Smith, not at the Smith School of Business. He's not there. Sorry about that, Christian. He's at our School of Computing. And so our prior director, Dr. Nick Graham, has stepped aside now to let Christian come in because Christian's expertise is really in artificial intelligence. And we knew at the part of the program, we needed to kind of shift the program to bring in this wave of artificial intelligence, which is actually the focus of today's webinar. And so we're glad to have these two faculty with us. The other people on the webinar, now they will come off, sort of show their, come off camera here as well, just to give a quick wave. But we have invited 4 of our MDPM alumni who are all actually working in different organizations. And so we have Suchita, who's the director of Canadian Digital Onboarding Portfolio at Bank of Montreal. She's also one of our inaugural cohort. So she is an MDPM graduate of 2023. And then we have Mo, who came through the program and then actually picked up an entrepreneurial venture. So he's the founder of Elithium, which hope I'm saying that right, MDPM grad of 2024. Now I'm going to flip over just for a second on Scott because Nicholas Doss is actually a technical product manager for AI platforms. Now this is also an entrepreneurial new startup venture. He's a graduate from both our MDPM program and our Masters of Management and Artificial Intelligence. He just graduated last week with Scott, MDPM 2025. And Scott Van Wil is the Director of Strategy Program Oversight at the Department of National Defense. And so as you can see, we have a broad range of people who have different problems. And I would argue different ways of leveraging AI in the problem space. So 2, I would say from the entrepreneurial perspective, and then Suchita and Scott that are more big corp, Suchita, of course, for profit, and Scott, our government representative for today. So these, when they do graduate, we always say we tap on them to bring them back. So literally, Scott and Nick have had a week as a graduate already back here in a webinar for us. And so they're going to turn their cameras off now, and we'll revisit. We'll see them again a little bit later on when we've kind of teed this thing up. All right, so it's just me for a minute here, and then I will call Jake and Christian back. But what I want to do is walk you through how we might think about the problem space and why the problem space is so important. And so many of you have probably seen, if you've been part of our webinars before, these crazy statistics around digital product failures. So approximately 70 to 80% of these initiatives that we take on are failing to meet their goals. And really, failure could be that they fail to reduce cost. If we're putting in digital tools and services to reduce cost, they fail to do that. Or in many cases, we end up with just low adoption rates. And this is where we're really starting to understand so often, in fact, too often, we build these digital products and services. We jump to the solution space way too quick, right? So we end up building a solution to a problem that really wasn't overly clear in the beginning. And when you invest in solving the wrong problem, this explains why oftentimes it ends up in a failure downstream in the product implementation. So what I wanted to do is introduce you to the methodology we use in the Masters of Digital Product Management program, and now in our new innovation suite, Masters of Management and Innovation Entrepreneurship, students will also be introduced to the same framework, which is a framework we use to look at the problem space from what we call 5 different perspectives. And so I use a pretty easy to understand case study here in AI Scribe. So AI Scribe is a new AI tool being used by primary care physicians, really to help doctors and the allied health professionals to document when they're talking to a patient. They're documenting, using this tool as a documentation tool. And so really at the end of the day, so many organizations are still going out in what I call buying technology. So this is a good example. We're trying to decrease documentation burden, capture more accurate transcripts of discussions between primary care and care providers with patients. And so they go out and buy or procure this type of tool. So the question then is, does AI Scribe, is that actually a solution to a clearly defined problem? So in the MDPM program and MMIE, what we do is we look at this problem from these 5 different perspectives. And so the first perspective we look at is the job. And so when you take a look at the problem we want to solve, we look at the underlying goals, motivations that drive users to hire a digital product or service to help them with this job, revealing both the functional, emotional, and social problems. We use a framework in the innovation suite on it's called Jobs to be Done. And so Jake Brower is our resident expert of this, and he really encourages the students to look at the problem from the job perspective. The next perspective we use is from the user perspective. So this, by looking at the problem from the user perspective, we illuminate the user's experience, emotions, pain points, and unmet needs across these different touch points, helping the team understand where and why problems occur from the user's perspective. So at the end of the day, it's the users that adopt this perspective. And so we use tools such as journey mapping as well as empathy mapping in both these programs. The third perspective is the ethical perspective. And so from this perspective, we use an ethical compass and some other ethical context analysis tools to really take a look at the problem to uncover moral, social, and cultural implications of the problem, ensuring that the proposed solution respects stakeholder values, mitigates harm, and promotes fairness and accountability. So just to recap so far, we've looked at the problem from the task perspective, the user perspective, the ethical perspective, and now we want, of course, because we want to understand the problem from the technical perspective that we're building out these tools, when you look at it from this perspective, you reveal technical possibilities, constraints, risks, and shape how the problem might be understood and framed from a technical feasibility perspective. So we use a tool called Assessing Emerging Computing Technologies, And so that really helps us look at the problem from the technical capabilities that exist, or better yet, maybe the technical capabilities that don't exist that you would need to build or invest in order to drive out a solution to this problem. Then last, but certainly not least, one of the perspectives that's critical is if we use or develop a digital product or service from all these different perspectives, we mitigate the technical risks, mitigate the ethical risks, there has to be something in it from the business perspective. So whether there be profit gain or cost reduction, but in order for an organization to invest in this new digital service or product, there needs to be some way that they're going to provide some revenue gains, cost advantages that really, determine why an organization would make this investment. And so in the program, we use a digital business model as the tool to look at it from this perspective. So now, when we do that and look at the problem from these multiple 5 perspectives, there's a couple things that happen. Certainly, we get a more holistic view of the problem, right? So in this perspective, and this is the outcome of the AI Scribe tool, right? We look at it as a manual, inefficient, cognitively demanding documentation is the problem really from the user perspective. And really, we're using up like valuable clinical time. There's errors and drive up costs, when really a lot of this documentation is more clerical work. These burdens reduce professional presence, undermine data quality, and erode trust. That comes out of the ethical perspective. And existing technologies cannot reliably or securely convert complex, context-rich clinical conversations, which really, this is coming out of the technical perspective to say, can these AI tools really do the job in a really robust way? Can it be delegated, if you will, to an AI tool? Or do we lose something? And from the technical perspective, we learn that really the technology that's available is not overly reliable, sometimes not overly secure, right? And oftentimes it misses the context that a clinician or a human would actually pick up. So this is a more holistic problem. And in our Innovation Suite programs, we actually spend a couple months in the problem space, really trying to understand what the problem is. Now, the challenge with that is that, it's not overly efficient. And so this is where we want to spotlight the role of AI, is how AI tools are really helping us do this work in a way that's more robust. It can be more comprehensive, and it can also be quicker. But then we also need to consider what limitations, right? When we delegate some of this problem space work to AI, we also need to consider. So this is the type of work that comes out of a comprehensive problem space analysis. If you look at AI Scribe as a tool, when you look at it across the different perspective, we get an idea of how the tool fits the problem across the 5 different dimensions or perspectives. And so you can see here that there's high fit, if you will, to the task, but for the other perspectives, you're right, we understand that the fit of AI Scribe is only moderate at best. And so what we get here is sometimes we can explain why investment in a tool like AI Scribe may actually fail to meet the expectations of, the investors in that tool. And that's where you get that gap between what you want, what you aspire, and what the tool actually delivers, right? Which gets into these sort of 70–80% of these tools failing. So this is my case study. And what it does is it highlights the idea that there are limitations of AI Scribe. And for any great product manager or entrepreneur or innovator, it's really important that we identify upfront and early what the limitations of these possible tools might be before we encourage organizations to make that investment. And so this is really why doing work in the problem space is so important, is that if it was done, it would prevent these organizations from investing in AI Scribe, recognizing that there's a number of different limitations that they would need to mitigate in order to get the most bang for their buck with that investment that they made. All right, so from there then, once we understand the problem space, we can actually come up with a revised solution, right? So the next generation of AI Scribe might evolve from a note-taking assistant to more of a trusted documentation collaborator. So maybe they would use the AI tool, but they would wrap other capabilities around that tool that might automate tasks of documentation, but also enhance professional agency, ethical accountability, and data stewardship, as well as interconnect across the digital care ecosystem so that clinicians and other care providers can actually share this information amongst other professionals. So we just get a more robust solution to the problem that they aim to solve at the beginning. All right, so I'm going to get Jake and Christian to come into camera now, because what I want to do is get their perspective on this case study with regard to two very different perspectives. So Jake's going to share a little bit about, in the problem space, the one thing that we do is we do this concept of, diverge out and converge back in. And so Jake, in your experience in the problem space, how can AI tools really help people do this in this kind of work more quickly, but also in a more comprehensive way?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest issue here is, we often get sort of pulled into the technology, as you mentioned, right? That we see this technology, it's possible for this technology to maybe solve some problem, and then we just assume that it's a problem and we go from there. And so I think the biggest problem we have is, yeah, maybe we've got a great idea, but we really need to get out into that problem space to make sure that's a real thing, right? So, one of the models we use regularly in this program is this real win worth it concept. And really this problem space thing is, for me as a marketer, my first question is it real? Is there some problem that we're actually solving? And going out and talking to customers, for one, it makes a lot of people nervous. And I came from a quant world and I got into talking to customers, and it is a sort of nerve-wracking thing. But the second part of that, once you get past that initial shyness, and people will tell you all kinds of stuff if you ask, the issue you run into is just reams and reams of data. That you've got transcripts, you've got all this sort of unstructured data that is very highly messy, really. And so, where I see the opportunity arising right now is that smart use of AI tools can help you actually organize all of that massive data. And one, it can check your assumptions that you're making. So you can go backwards and check your assumptions, but you can also see what is actually emerging from this data in a way that's more structured and fast. This could take weeks and weeks of a team's time in the past. We might be able to get a rough cut at this data that we can then refine, use the AI to get the rough cut and then refine it using our own understanding. So there's lots of ways. That's just a customer example, but again, take lots and lots of information, pare it down quickly so we can start to make some sense.
Excellent. All right. Now, Jake, am I moving on to these slides here? Is this where I'm passing over to you?
Yeah, I was just going to back up a little bit of what you already said. So
Yeah,
I don't think I've controlled the slides. If we want to
I
go to the
do.
next one. Oh,
Yep.
you do. All right, cool. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but I get to be the dorky marketing academic here in the room and talk a little bit about the research evidence that we've got. And so as a marketer, I really care about that statistic that Catherine gave us really early on, that 70 to 80% of product failure is like, as a marketing person, as somebody who cares about product, that's sort of a nauseating statistic. Like, why is it even humanly possible to be so much worse than even flipping a coin? And so, there's lots of research out there looking at why products fail. And really, I go through this in a lot of detail in one of my classes, but the core takeaway here is that there are two big categories of things that are problematic. The one we often pay a lot of attention to is the strategy execution issues. What are we doing wrong operationally? What are we doing wrong with executing our marketing mix? But the reality is most of the data suggests that the fuzzy front end issues, the stuff on the left-hand side of this diagram, is actually where a lot of problems are happening. They're long before we ever get to the market, we get to the execution phase, that there's these massive problems that occur. And so one of the themes that comes back to this is it's, these fuzzy front end issues. And Catherine, if you go to the next slide. So the first question I always get on this, because one, those are some statistics that are built around sort of more traditional kinds of domains of product things. So the nice question I get sometimes in classes, but aren't digital products different, right? There's so many characteristics that are different about them. And then I read the subtle subtext of that, which is, but aren't those results really old? And so what's interesting about this, and since we're talking about AI, I went in and asked perplexity.ai to give me a little bit of information. I put my prompts at the bottom in case you want to replicate. But first I asked the question, why do so many digital products fail? And then I asked, of these categories that came up, just follow-ups for percentages. What percentage of the time is it estimated this happens? And what we can see from these really quick statistics is that that lack of product market fit, not understanding your users, their feedback, having an unfocused value proposition, adding features that don't matter to anybody, so that tech focus versus really solving a problem is estimated to be like 35 to 40% of the failures that we see in digital product. The other one is poor project management. And a big part of that project management is bringing all those perspectives together that Kathryn's talking about and launching a product before it's actually ready, right? We put a product out in the marketplace that doesn't do all the things we're hoping it'll do. That's another 35 to 40%. I consider these front end issues before we even get into the field. And what you'll see is at the end, technical challenges. Is our product really technically the best? Do we have enough money to launch it properly? Actually makes up a really small proportion of the failures you see. So of that 70 to 80% failure rate, it seems like 70 to 80% of those are coming from failures in the upfront part of the process and not making sure we understand the problem. And Kathryn, I just had one more, and then I want to get it over to the panelists as soon as we can. So what do we learn from really successful digital products and companies that get that failure rate down low? They build around actual needs, not internal assumptions, by understanding the problem space. And this is Perplexity AI said this. You see the prompt at the bottom. I didn't ask it about the problem space, but the first thing it said was problem space. Launching minimum viable products to collect that feedback. Again, iterate rapidly, validate the solutions before scaling. Again, we're constantly trying to diverge, try to understand the problem a bit more, then converge back to a solution, then go test that assumption. And we keep going back and forth. Teams, again, experimentation shows up in that third point. And then finally, the strong product management with clear communication, realistic deadlines, and well-organized team roles. And so all of those things, the key things that make some products more successful and some organizations better, is really happening at the fuzzy front end. And so a lot of that stuff is unstructured. It's a very vague space. Our students often struggle with the problem space. It's really hard to get your head there instead of that automatic solution space. And I think we've got a lot of tools coming up that can help us do that. And I think that's where I'm handing over to Christian.
Excellent. I might just jump in here quickly before we give to Christian, because I think the one thing to highlight here, and Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the challenges with regard to what you're talking about is in this fuzzy front end, right? One of the biggest advantages to critical thinking is the ability to actually literally look at something from a different perspective. And that's the one thing that these tools do very well, right? Because they are discrete, you can say, okay, let's look at it. And humans can't, because we're really caught up in our own biases. And, it's very difficult if you're a technical person to look at something from a user perspective, or if you're a user person to look at it from a technical perspective. And I preface this because this is why we bring Christian in, because we say these, broad kind of statements about this is what the tool's actually really good at, but he actually knows what the tool's good at and where it actually, lets us down. So Christian, again, just to give him a brief introduction, he is our colleague from the School of Computing, and we've asked him this whole idea of really, when we think about using generative AI to boost innovation in the problem space, what are the challenges and benefits we should be looking at, Christian?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. You've set things up tremendously, so I don't think I need to take too much time before we go to the panel. I like the term fuzzy front end for our problem space. Perhaps we rename the first phase of the program to be our fuzzy front end. But to give one more nauseating statistic, if you look specifically at the AI initiatives businesses are going forward with, it's a 95% failure rate, is a recent stat that has just come out. And it largely comes down to the solutionism mindset, right? I have a tool, where's my problem? Where's my problem? And it's completely flipped. If you don't look at the problem space first and you ask, is there a problem here to be solved? Then of course you're going to have a 19 out of 20 failure rate for these things. So these uninformed attempts to just apply AI in an inappropriate way is where most of these failures sort of surface. Now, some of the benefits, especially in the problem space, that we're seeing with the tooling that's emerging right now, I kind of narrowed it down to three key things, and you've already touched on them a little bit. One is brainstorming sessions, facilitated and interactive, right? If you do have that block and you're trying to ideate, facilitating that conversation back and forth, or a list of ideas to help flesh it out and so on, that sort of brainstorming phase, generative AI is extremely good at. And of all of these, you'll see there's a common theme where whatever it produces, 80% of it can be wrong, but that 20% can be a golden nugget that you take along with your own insights, right? And so that's the place you want to be when you're using this technology. The next is deep research for market analysis. I use deep research as a very specific term here. Many of the different AI products offer this deep research. It'll go away for 20 minutes. It will look up links and it will give you the paper trail to say, this is what's happening out there. So a very well articulated, go and look at the existing market in this particular niche sub area and pull up all of the links in the articles and the stats that you need for that. It can be extremely, extremely useful for cutting down a week's worth of work into half an hour to an hour. Then the final one is automated red teaming. And so by their nature, they will do whatever it is that you ask of them. So give me good ideas. They'll just say what you want to hear and amplify the bias that you already have. And so with that in mind, if you come up with authentically the ideas and the sort of problem space analysis that you would like to go forward with, and then you bring it to the AI to say, critique this. I want you, what I'm asking for you to do is to red team my ideas, right? Let's have an argument right now. Let's have a debate. And I want you to poke holes in the plans that I'm creating. This puts you in a very, very good place because again, it can be wrong 80% of the time. And then that 20% where it makes a really good point about, you know, some hole, some gap in what it is that you're doing, that 20% is gold, right? And so just from the accuracy perspective, if you author things and then you have generative AI come and critique that in sort of an automated red teaming way, then you can really, really see this shine. And so again, I think the biggest risk of this technology is it's an amplifier for expertise and it really is a detriment to the uninformed. And so if you don't understand what it is that you're asking and it's giving solutions that look correct, that is where the real danger is to accept those at face value. But for the expertise, and if you do have that background and you can critique or have it critique what it is that you're producing, that's when it is an amplifier for what it is that you're doing. So there's a very high level notions of how this can be used. And this notion of automated red team appears in many different ways across many different products to sort of help in this space. But those are the general themes that we're seeing. Yeah. Thanks, Kathryn.
Great. No problem. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you, Christian, as we start to explore this even further. To Jake's point, you know, we tried to get as academics as quickly through our content as possible because really the real value here are the four panelists. So I'd ask them now to turn their cameras on. And really what we wanted to do was, you know, they go through this program and in a lot of cases, then they go back to their day job, right? Their day job. And so what we've done is created a set of questions that we've given them in advance so they are prepared. So your job as the audience is now to give them questions that they're not prepared for to see how quick they can think on their feet. There is a Q&A button on the bottom. So we'll start to now field questions from the audience if you want to add your question and answer. Jake and Christian, if there's anything in that Q&A that you can answer while I'm facilitating the discussion with the panel, same with the panelists who aren't on for specific questions, please do comment. So you've got lots of people to answer your questions, and so we're hoping that you can populate anything in there while we actually facilitate or moderate the discussion here. So we're going to get started with two of our panelists, so Nicholas and Suchita. And really, Nicholas, again, coming in from the entrepreneurial perspective, right? Because we definitely want to use these tools in the problem space as an entrepreneur. And then Suchita really coming in from the corporate innovation perspective. The question is, and we'll start with Nicholas, how easy is it, or does this kind of approach, this 5 different perspectives in the problem space, actually translate to real life practice? Nicholas.
Yeah, so Kathryn, just to give some context, so coming from the TR, so Thomson Reuters, and really where we're at right now is, and I know we've talked about this before in terms of how regulated the space can be, and in my current role in our space, we see that there's a lot of movement from startups that are encroaching. So the competition is moving very quickly, and I think one of the really important things is looking at the product lines that we have currently and getting as much data from everything that we're tracking. Now, there's sort of 2 parts to this. So one part is, using AI to be able to quickly get that qualitative and quantitative data. And on top of that is the conversation that our frontline I'd say, sales personnel, for example, or customer support are having with customers, taking that and essentially looking at that wholesome data, using AI to be able to analyze that data and sort of create like a full picture of what are the things that we need to focus on, and how that sort of drives our roadmap, as we sort of move forward. The other thing too is the reason why it's so critical to move quickly is when you see a lot of the startups that are competing and how quickly that they're moving, it is really imperative for us to match or exceed that speed. So whether it is taking that data, eventually turning them into prototypes, having these conversations, with teams as well as cross-functional teams as well. So the other aspect of it is that these silos that we might be seeing in sort of corporate structures, starts breaking down because there is a need to work together, and produce quickly. So there is this sort of focus on, or at least expectation on, moving at a hyperscale. And that's where we see, whether it is in the analytics tools that we use that now also offer, sort of AI features, whether it is prototyping features that we use to spin up those prototypes to get quick iteration and feedback, whether it's from customers, internal teams. But really, at the end of the day, it's moving fast and moving very quickly. So I would say that the hyperscale sort of at hyperscale speed and level is what the focus is on, at least from my perspective.
Excellent. Well, and before we jump into Sucheta, I think the one interesting thing about entrepreneurship versus Sucheta's world of corporate innovation is entrepreneurs really do get to focus, I think, Nicholas, on the market and the user often being the same thing, right? You go into corporate innovation and all of a sudden the Bank of Montreal has a set of, objectives that they need to hit, where sometimes, and Sucheta I'm sure would agree, sometimes, what the users want has to be balanced into what's best for the bank, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so this is why Sucheta, the same question, like when you look at these different perspectives within innovation at the Bank of Montreal, how does what looking at them from these different perspectives translate into real practice in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'm going to add on to what Nicholas said, but I also want to expand and extend out of sort of the financial institution context, because I've had the experience to be in large retail organizations. I've gone through startups, and I think the theme has really been the same in terms of when we have these wonderful concepts and ideas of the market moving quickly and there's new tools that are being introduced across the industries, across the size of the different organizations. The one theme that I find that is similar is culture. And there has to be this culture and safe space of being able to adopt and fail with new tools. And when you don't have that culture of failure and acceptance, that's really where I've seen the adoption doesn't work. So in order for us to, even in a large corporate environment, to create innovation, there's been a lot of focus that's gone into ensuring that it is a safe space for people that are within the organization to try and test new things. And then what we also find, to the point that you made, Kathryn, there's a lot of different pieces that you have to balance. You do have to balance the user experience. You need to ensure that it meets with, the organization's own rules and the organization's values. It's very similar, I would say. Like, I think it still does extend to the entrepreneurial world too, because as an entrepreneur, you're going to do the same thing. You have values, you've got core things that you want to ensure that you are bringing to the market, and that has to be in line with what users looking for. So I think the difference that I see between the entrepreneurial and the large organization is just the amount of different things, ideas, opinions that need to be balanced. And that's really where I find the AI tools are really helpful, because just the sheer amount of data that's needed to be able to get through. the different perspectives that you can actually rely on your various AI engines to be able to surface. And I think Christian made the point of sort of helping to critique. That's really where a lot of the value comes from. But the actual adoption of it and the ease of being able to get a lot of our internal employees and just employees anywhere to be able to utilize these tools, I find there's that culture that needs to be there. We've got senior leaders that really are, speak to the usage of AI tools. They really demonstrate how they've been able to utilize the AI tools, what works, what not, what doesn't work. There's a big focus on governance and ethics, and I think that's a huge part of it too, because there's almost always a fear of, okay, I'm using AI tool, I don't really know. Again, to the point that you made, Christian, was it is, if you don't know what the tool is bringing to you, if you don't actually have the experience to understand that result, then you are going to fail. And you may not be able to articulate what the tool is telling you, if it's correct or not correct. So again, being able to have that culture of test and fail, test and learn, I think that's really across the board, regardless of the organization and the industry. I really find that's really what's important in getting the adoption and getting people more comfortable with utilizing such tools.
Sushita, I might move on to Mo. Next, I'll tee this up for you, Mo, a little bit. But with the one observation I'm having, and coming back to Jake maybe after I talk to you, but so the one observation is that really, in an academic program or an academic way of doing things, we often create these frameworks, right? So we're like, here's a framework, and if you analyze this situation from that framework, then you'll understand this specific perspective at a deeper level. And so, I think one of the advantages of using AI is the AI can understand the framework. And many times the AI can actually draw on the developers of the framework or whatever. So Mo, I know that when you left, you kind of went into your own thing and you're pursuing your own entrepreneurial venture. But from your perspective, which of those tools maybe was, the toughest for you to reach pragmatically, where you're like, this seems maybe a bit more theoretical, but with the leverage of AI, you think maybe you could use it in a way that would drive more value for you in your own day-to-day operations in your startup?
So for me, I actually lean a lot on AI to organize my workflows because from my perspective, like I deal with a lot of different clients and there's a lot of context switching every day. And with a lot of context switching, it gets really messy for me. And I feel as someone who's sometimes a one man, like right now, that's what I currently do for myself. Like I don't have a big team under me yet. I just need that help. I feel like AI saves me the time and effort for me to hire like someone to do that work that I'm doing. So it really organizes my context, and I definitely start using it as well to dive deeper in certain aspects of my clients. Uh, Talking from a point of like the five perspectives, like surprisingly, I always thought that I would be more focused on the user and the technical perspective, but surprisingly, I found myself spending a lot of time on the task, like the jobs to be done, and the business perspective, which isn't my strongest suit, to be honest, but with time, I kind of figured out that these are the two most important perspectives for a smaller business or a smaller client. Why? Because they usually come in. So first of all, like smaller clients, they usually come in, they think they have this fantastic solution and they know what they're building and they're like, okay, we need you to build this, right? But usually the value that I try to provide is I take a step back and evaluate, is this the actual problem? Like, is this a solution for a problem that actually exists? Are they solving for the right problem or not, right? And I use AI tools sometimes to validate this. Like I lean a lot on them by like, okay, this is my train of thoughts, plug it into the AI, talk to me. Like I like having conversations back and forth. But like leaning on what Christian said, you really have to understand what you're doing because AI, unfortunately, sometimes spits out a lot of gibberish, right? So if you're really not focused on what you're doing, or you don't have the expertise on what you're building, or what the actual problem is, it sometimes could throw you in fantasy land, and we should do this and we should do that. And I think the problem is this, right? So you gotta have that capability of bringing things back in perspective. So tasks for sure, the tasks, jobs to be done is a big perspective that I focus on, and the business perspective as well. I'm constantly evaluating, will this actually move the needle for these small businesses, because they're limited on budgets, they're limited on resources, and every single decision that we make could be either fantastic and move it in the right direction, or it could be catastrophic and they end up losing all their budget, right? So surprisingly, these are the two perspectives that I kind of focus on, and I lean a lot on AI to validate, am I moving in the right direction? I just sometimes need that validation, especially when there's a lot of context switching, right? You can get lost into that whole like context switching. What am I doing right now? What client, what's their business, what's their metrics and stuff? And then comes the user experience and the technical feasibility for sure. Like they have to come with time, but I feel the tasks and the business perspective, they kind of are, they provide the North Star for me, and then I build everything else on top.
And I think that it sounds like too, you're the one still doing the critical thinking, Mo. You're just leveraging the tool as a way to kind of provide you with a different
100%.
perspective and speed up your
100%.
process, right? Yeah.
100%.
So Nicholas, do you agree, like looking at this from an entrepreneurial perspective, or is that a thumbs up for you in terms of like ditto what Mo said before we go on to the corporate innovation side?
Yeah, there's just simply to add to what Mo's saying, and kind of bridging that sort of corporate and entrepreneurial landscape. At the end of the day, you have this data, you do the data synthesis, and ideally what you want to do is, have that validation with your customers, essentially, because these are the people that are paying for your service or product, right? But the purpose of having these tools is to really speed things up, right? Because we are moving a lot quicker. And I kind of go back to this, sort of hyperscale, sort of focus, because of how quickly startups are moving and how quickly that they can encroach on a lot of legacy products or services. And there's this huge change in mindset of how we function in the corporate setting, right? And I completely agree to what you had said earlier too. It can be different in sort of regulated sort of markets or industries/services, but you do feel that pressure, in that corporate environment. And I think really at the end of the day there is definitely a push to use different tools, services to speed up every aspect of that cycle, from, understanding what the problems are, understanding what the customers need, generating that roadmap, coming up with prototypes, validating those prototypes, and then getting those things shipped. But, we want to make sure that we are producing value at the end of the day for those customers. So, yeah.
Excellent. All right, Scott, it's over to you. So now Scott, of course, is doing all this innovation and leading this innovation within our Department of National Defense. And we've talked about a lot so far. So we've talked about the different perspectives. We've talked about the use of AI. So really, in your day-to-day work, what is taking priority, or what resonates with you the most in terms of driving out innovation for D&D?
So I guess it's the uniqueness of Department of National Defense compared to other federal departments, where we're not actually providing services directly to Canadians. We're actually enabling the Canadian Armed Forces. So everything that we're doing is putting the tools required to the soldiers, to the sailors, to the air personnel on operations. So where they're sitting it's very, it spans the whole, I guess, consequential spectrum, from everything from, okay, your odds are not accurate, all the way to the ultimate consequence if they're not getting decision superiority over their adversaries, where it could have serious consequences to them on operations. So that's where we're really trying to get some of this innovation and get some of this moving for us, because the amount of data that we're getting right now, especially some of the new platforms that are coming online, the amount of data that they're going to produce is just so much that it's unmanageable manually, right? So we're going to need the AI to help in that so that we have that decision superiority with all that data that we're getting. So that the users, again, the user perspective being one of the key ones here, so they have that in their hands on operations that help protect them and Canada. The other piece again is the ethical side of this. So again, ethics in defense isn't optional. It's really an operational discipline for us. And when we integrate the ethics early, we prevent the harm, the bias, and the erosion of trust that's so key for all military personnel.
Yeah, well, and it does sound, I think Suchita, probably Scott's story is very similar to you at the bank, where your users really are, in a lot of cases, employees within the bank itself. So what's your take on these perspectives and which ones are most important at the Bank of Montreal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like exactly what Scott said, we've got sort of these internal users, we have external users, we've got lots of different, again, use cases that we can typically go through on a day-to-day. And I think what we typically try to do as much as possible is utilize, I find the perspectives change, the importance of the perspective changes depending on the use case that we're challenging at the time. Almost always we'll find, like, you want to start from a task perspective first, because you really want to understand who's doing that task, what are they actually trying to do. User perspective is typically what we are building everything around. So once you've sort of looked at the task, it comes to the user, but then that balance sort of moves into the business perspective, and then it goes into the technical perspective. So I find it's a bit of moving that needle to say, okay, have I figured this piece out? Does the user perspective actually make sense? Does the analytics reflect what we're looking at from a user perspective standpoint? And that's where the AI tools make a big difference. I think, again, really being able to get that validation, ensuring that you're getting a bit more of a critique, get more data and information. And I think going back to the speed part is actually quite important, because everybody's looking for speed and quality and trying to move things forward. And I think what we try to really do as much as possible is find areas where you can start doing a lot more automation. So using Gen AI tools to have bots sort of like, moving other bots forward and creating more capacity for folks to really do critical thinking versus, as what Mo said, doing lines of codes on his own. Similarly on QA things, there's a lot of push on QA automation. How do you continue to do that, create some space? And I think that's really where the tools are coming in. And I kind of take it back to almost like 5 or 6 years ago, where we were, migrating sort of these low value transactions. And I know a lot of, even in retail, they did that, where they're like, oh, you can just purchase things online. We don't need you to come in to just buy this regular stuff. Just do it online. We want to keep the actual retail space for more complex things. And I think that's very similar trend is now moving into the evolution here, whereas before you were just moving into a digital experience. Now it's, how do I make that digital experience more self-serve, have AI sort of drive that experience and evolve that experience. And that's really where I think the innovation is coming from.
Thank you. So I know, Scott, we let you off the hook for most of the beginning of this webinar, but now you're back on. So we wanted to go to Scott next to really think about, so we've talked about AI, we've talked about the 5 perspectives. Jake's also talked about, which I want to come back to, this whole idea of then filtering through this, idea of like, can we win? Is it worth it? This kind of different ways of analyzing the problem. So the question for Scott is, how are you taking all of that within the Department of National Defense and actually thinking strategically about creating a before you build practice?
So what we're just about to publish our digital strategy that we've been working on for the last, I guess, since April. And that is going to provide us with that sort of North Star for an implementation roadmap that will look to create a defense-specific discovery framework before we make any digital investments. We're going to look at integrating all those perspectives that you mentioned earlier, whether it's the user, the task, the business operations, the technical and the ethical sides, into the product intakes and the capability development gates as we move forward. Combined with this is what I guess our sort of our digital operating model that we're going to be using. That's going to be that oversight piece of making sure everything's on track and making sure it's all there. But I mean, it's all new initiatives are going to have to be able to justify that problem to be solved in the operational terms. The user impact across the domains, whether it's air, sea, land, cyber, space, and then the ethical and security implications of the data and AI involved.
So I have to admit, Scott, as a taxpayer, what I'm hearing you say is that, we should feel very confident that D&D is going to, do the due diligence ahead of really understanding before an investment's made. And the other part of your earlier part was that you're going to use your clear understanding of the problem space to make sure that the constituents within D&D have what they need to protect us in the most effective way. So it's such a great example of why this work is so important. And I think, Mo, from your perspective, like you really are now trying to create new value as an entrepreneur to answer the world's problems in a way that you can provide these better, services. So how are you embedding all of this discussion in your day-to-day work, creating an early stage practice at your organization?
So again, going back to the fact that I deal with businesses that are just starting out, they're very small businesses, right? So it goes back to three important things. The first thing is clarifying like what the job to be done is. A lot of businesses don't really know what they're actually doing or what solution they're trying, or if there's actually a problem worth solving with that solution. And then just validating their business goals, like that just business goal makes sense, or is this going to move in the right direction? Is this going to move in the direction that they expect as well? Because a lot of my clients have certain expectations, and then I have my own expectations, and sometimes they don't align. So I feel like this is one of the most important things at the very early stages, because you don't want the client to feel that you didn't do the job right or the work right. They're just aligning on these expectations are very important. And then the most important thing is testing whether what we're building is the right, like what we're solving is the right problem. And these are the three things that go into my before you build approach, right?
Excellent. Well, and I think even to your point, Mo, like if you don't do this, the difference with you is you're no longer in business, right? Like the whole idea, like it's one thing to get buy-in, but you want people coming back.
Oh yeah,
right?
and you don't want to end up losing trust. You don't want to end up losing credibility if you're not getting the job right, if you're not meeting expectations. Like it's catastrophic for someone like myself who depends on my clients, right? So it's definitely, to your point, it's catastrophic if it's not done right.
Yeah, I think catastrophic for you and Scott in different ways, but definitely it works in the same terms of logic. But so I've got one question for Nicholas, and then I'm going to go to Suchita. So the one question for Nicholas, which I think we all want to know, right? What is, what happens when AI is not used in this space? Right? Like when you look at some organization that would say, we're just not going to bother. We're not good. We're going to keep doing it the old way and we're not going to leverage AI. What does that organization lose?
Productivity. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, primarily because we get measured on that at TR. It's also understandable because of how much time that saves us, how much time that saves me as a technical product manager, how much that also saves teams, and just sort of the whole process. And I know I've touched upon it a bit before, but when I compare, sort of the sort of my time, where I've used a lot more AI tools than I previously used to, as during my time as a software developer, it's huge. Whether it's, we talked about validating issues or the data that we're seeing, it isn't just that. It is, trying to get through some of these problems, addressing issues or, sort of technical issues, more specifically in my case, that really helps. But it really, comes down to that time, and it's so critical now. I keep going back to how quickly we move, and it's not because of this broken record that we hear constantly every day. It's just when you look at the landscape of what is happening, and we have to be so attuned to what's happening in our market, in the industry, and how quickly things are moving, whether it being competing with startups that have so much more agility to more sort of a little bit more rigid corporate structures. There is an expectation that we do have to move fast. But with that being said, too, of course, we have to ensure that when we use these AI tools, we are validating what we're seeing, and it doesn't really take a lot of time to do that, particularly because, in my case, like I said before, when you work with cross-functional teams, you have those opportunities to validate those pain points, to validate the data, save instances. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to productivity, value, and just how we move forward, as an organization. So, yeah.
And it's hard to believe that, you four will be dinosaurs when, the next cohort gets these tools embedded and they're like, wow, you actually did this stuff by hand. You're like, that was literally last year. So, so that's how fast we're moving. So Suchita, the last question for you before we kind of just check in with Jake and Christian that we've got the questions answered in the Q&A. What happens when people try to use these tools and the frameworks without actually understanding the 5 perspectives?
I think that's a great question. I almost want to throw it into Copilot and see what it gives me back as an answer, just for fun. But I can tell you from the human perspective what that is. And truly, it really does come back to understanding and the experience that, again, when I look at you, Jake and Kathryn and Christian, if we didn't have the experience that you brought to the table to walk us through trying to deliver, but then also make that framework iterative where you added our feedback into the framework and we were like, oh, it's working this way, it should be working this way, and here's how we need to be able to iterate on the framework, but make it flexible. All of that experience, I don't believe it's there yet. And as somebody who hasn't gone through either the experience of potentially product management themselves or understanding digital products, or somebody who's maybe not a heavy user of digital product manager may take the responses that are generated out of AI as gospel, and they might take that as that's the truth. And going back to the point that Nicholas made around validation, that's a really important point. If you are in a bit of a silo by yourself and you don't have other stakeholders where you can validate some of this information and responses with, then there is a very high risk that you might be going down the wrong path. And I think that's where the frameworks really come into play, because you can throw your question into Copilot or any other type of engine, get a response, but then I can utilize the frameworks to actually validate that response, which means, can I take that response and go to my users and say, is this the right type of product? Because AI told me this is the product I should be building. This is what the market wants. And if I do the user research and look at the task perspective, understand from a business perspective, this actually resonates, then I think that sort of cyclical AI feedback and utilization of framework works together only because I've then stepped in and been able to do some level of validation. So I think the risk is if you can't do the validation, if you're going into it without the experience and without the learning, you may end up in a situation where potentially, you didn't quite know that was the right path or not.
So based on Christian's facial expression, Suchita, I think you pass with flying colors, but I wanted to check in with Christian. Is there anything you would add to this discussion before I close out with Jake?
Yeah, I would just make one mention on what we might mean by validation. And so if I have a notion that needs to be validated, it's a subtle difference, but it means everything in the world to go to generative AI and say, does this look good? Like, I'm doing this, are we okay? And the sycophantic nature would be, yeah, it's fine. And then on the other hand, a very slight twist to that to say, what am I missing? Is there any ethical consideration that I didn't capture here? Is there any user angle that I am missing inside of this plan? To ask the generative AI to critique as your way of validating makes all of the difference in the world. And then you can ignore what it says with your own expertise, but you are, in a sense, asking for it to validate it meaningfully. And so that would be the one sort of capstone thought that I have on the discussion. Yeah, validate in the right way with this meaningfully.
Perfect. All right, Jake, the last questions coming your way. And for those of you who don't know, we did put a pause on the Masters of Digital Product Management program for about 6 months in order for us to catch up and really make sure that we were embedding AI across all phases of the life cycle of digital product management. So Jake, just quickly, how much rework are you having to do with regard to retraining yourself to teach the concept of navigating the problem space for this new upcoming cohort?
Well, I mean, I think it was mentioned before, Suchita kind of said this too, that all these things are evolving over time. I think every single year that I've taught in this program, this will be my 4th year. I've been in it since the very beginning. I've revised all of my course material every single year. I mean, there's no way around it because it just moves that fast. And I got to say, the students that we bring in, Mo, I got to tell you, it warms my heart to hear you throwing around jobs to be done just like so fluidly, and it just makes me feel special. But we've got great students who come to this program that I say it all the time that I can't ever come to the classroom at less than 100% because you all are going to push me every single time I come into the classroom. And if I don't know an answer, I better know it before the next time I see you guys in class. And so, in this case, the growth of this generative AI, how can we use these tools to make it better? That's the joy of teaching this program for me is I'm learning along with you guys and I'm learning from you guys. And we're sharing a lot of knowledge and learning in the classroom. It's not a one-way communication of information by any means. But this is feedback we've gotten and we're revising it again. And my course will look completely different. Well, maybe not completely, but mostly different this next time around from where it's been last year, which looked different from the year before. And we evolve as we have to because this is a fast-moving field and we better be fast-moving too.
Yeah. And now we have Christian making sure that we do it in the right way. So he's going to keep us at bay so everyone can feel confident that that will come out of the gate better than more aligned, I would say, to how the field is moving. So quickly, thank you to our 4 panelists. We do appreciate you spending this hour with us and sharing your insights. To Jake and Christian, thank you again for your time today, and we look forward to how this all moves forward. And for the rest of the people that joined us today, navigating the problem space is, in my opinion, one of the most misunderstood areas. And we really do hope that some of our practices and the feedback from the panel and the faculty help to think about that in a little different way. Here's a QR code if you have any additional questions. We also provided the information for you to join if you're interested in either programs. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And thanks again to everyone. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.